Hey there, Refuge Church. I am privileged to be with you once more. One last note before I disappear onto maternity leave. So I'm going to pray and kick us off. God, I thank you that you have given me this opportunity to be able to share your word with this group of people. I ask that you would help me to speak clearly and well and helpfully, that my words might be a blessing and an aid for your people wherever you might find them this morning. I pray that your word would not come back void, but that it would accomplish the things that you intended to accomplish. I pray all of this in your name, Jesus. Amen. Okay, so yes, if you weren't aware, if you've missed it somehow, I am extraordinarily pregnant, coming up on my last days here before my baby comes. So this video is a final conclusion, wrapping up our Gospel and Emotional Well-Being series before we transition. So I'll talk a little bit about what's going to happen while I'm away, and that is we will continue to meet online. If you are one of those folks, we'll just have our guest preachers uploaded, Lord willing. All that technology that we've been putting together will come together, and you guys will have some great content from people who are much smarter than me, and have a whole different perspective and a whole different, burden from the Lord to share with you guys. So I'm so looking forward to that and being nourished by them, and I hope you do as well. Okay, so today is our conclusion episode for the series, because we know we finished off 9, but we didn't really wrap everything together. We didn't really come together and talk about the things that we've been learning and meditating on for these past 9 weeks. So here we are. We're going to take a pause to review these gospel messages. We've looked at all these different characters. We've looked at all these emotional experiences. We've tried to grow in our emotional intelligence and thinking, being aware of the way that we experience ourselves and the way that others might be different from us, right? We've been growing, Lord willing. And all of that is wonderful. And if I was to pick one thing out of the emotional skills we've been looking at when we look at these keys, so many of them have to do with remaining curious about ourselves and saying, why am I experiencing this way? And then starting to use that critical thinking around that and asking ourselves good questions about our motivations. So that's one practice we can take forward and carry forward into the future with us. But, it's very important to me that we don't just be people who like to pile up our facts and like to pile up our different knowledge sources. That can be very fun for some of us. It can make some of us feel very vindicated, right? Aha, this is why these people were doing it wrong, and now I know the right way, right? That can be pretty tempting. But I really want to take a minute here at the end as we review what we've learned together, the gospel messages that we found from these characters, from learning about the Enneagram somewhat, because that's where the real life is, right? And so here's a little summary for us with the Bible verses that we matched with each type. So 1, gospel message. We do not have to fight to be good enough because God has already accepted us. Versus, there is therefore now no condemnation for those in Jesus, the Messiah. Number 2, we do not have to strive to be loved because God already loves us. Verse here in his love, not that we loved God, but that God loved us. Type 3, we do not have to prove ourselves via our accomplishments because nothing can change the way that God sees us. The verse is, the great love with which he loved us even when we were dead in our wrongdoings. Opposite of accomplishments. Number 4, Gospel for type 4. We do not have to work to appear more special because we will never be left by the God who perfectly sees us and understands us. The verse is, if I make my bed in Sheol, in hell, you are there. Even there, your hand shall lead me. Gospel for type 5. We do not have to be competent because we're invited to trust God's competence. This is talking about Shlomo, Solomon. It says his heart was not fully with Yahweh as the heart of David's had been. It's what God desires. Gospel for type 6. We don't have to create security for ourselves because God is our security. The verse promise with that one is the Lord will rescue me from every evil thing and will bring me safely into his kingdom. The gospel for number 7, type number 7, is that we don't have to run anymore because the God who is with us in the darkness is the God who will help us heal. And the verse is from Ephesians, and it says, everything that is made visible will become light. Gospel for 8, we do not have to cover our hurt and weakness because God is our strong nurturer. My grace is sufficient for you. My power is made complete in weakness. And finally, gospel for 9, we do not have to mute our needs and the wholeness of who we are because God rejoices in our presence and our voice. And the verse or the challenge that goes with that is, fear not and do not be afraid, for the Lord goes with you. He will never leave you or forsake you. So I don't know about you, but if I hear that collection, I don't have to fight to be good enough. I don't have to strive to be loved. I don't have to try to prove myself. I don't have to try to look more special or more unique than anybody else. I don't have to be competent. I don't have to create security for myself. I don't have to keep running. I don't have to cover over my hurt and weakness. I don't have to try to mute myself to fit at the table somehow. That sounds like freedom to me. Hopefully that lands for you and your soul and wherever you are at as well. The fact that God has already accepted us, God already loves us, nothing can change the way God sees us. We'll never be left by the God who perfectly sees and understands us. We can trust in God's competency. God is our security. God is our strong nurturer. God rejoices in our presence and in our voice. Hopefully those truths can serve as a foundation that we can build something really beautiful from. And hopefully also those words and those promises and those verses can be a balm to our soul, a healing ointment that gets at the core of where we have been hurt, whether in our childhood experience or our church experience or anything else along the way. Because there's a whole landscape of things that might have hurt us, right? However, like I said, it can be hard to re-receive those truths, even as we've been learning them, even as we've been meditating on them week after week. Partially because of who we are, maybe, and partially because of where we've been. So I want to share this passage with us, and we're not going to do a full-out exegesis. That would take a very long time. But I want to read it for us once, and then I'm going to walk us through it. So this is from Revelation 2, which is always fun. If you're not familiar, it's the wild and epic end to our whole Bible. At the very, very end, we have these visions from Yochanan, not the baptizer, the disciple rather. And he has a vision of Jesus giving different messages to these different churches. So in Revelation chapter 2, the beginning of it, he is speaking to the church in Ephesus. So that's the context. So this is his letter to the church that's in Turkey. One of them. He says, I know your works and your labor and patient endurance, and that you are not able to tolerate evil. And you put to the test those who call themselves apostles and are not, and you found them to be false. You have patient endurance and have endured many things because of my name, and you have not become weary. But this I have against you. You have left your first love. Remember, therefore, from whence you have fallen, and turn back and do the works that you did at first. If you do not, I am coming to you, and I will remove your lampstand from its place unless you turn back. That's a reference to the prophets. But you do have this. You hate the deeds of the Nicolaitans, things which I also hate. The one who has an ear, let him or her hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To the one who conquers, I will grant to him or her to eat from the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God. Okay, so walking through this passage, Jesus starts out, says, I know the things that you've been doing. You have been working so hard. You've been patiently enduring for my people at Refuge, planting a church in the middle of 2020. Amazing work, trying to be and provide a sanctuary for people who have questions and have been working on their deconstruction and have been hurt by the church and have been told that they're not good enough or something in their identity is evil. Creating that space for them to be able to come and still live in the presence of God and in community and enjoy relationship with him and have a chance to ask all those questions is something beautiful that we've done together. And Revelation 2, Jesus acknowledges that. He sees the work that's been done and he says, I know that you've been patiently enduring and how hard you've been working. It also says, he says, I know that you are not able to tolerate evil. This one, the gifts of great suffering and great hurt is that you have an alarm bell installed in your brain now, for better or for worse. Sometimes for better and sometimes for worse, that goes ding, 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 ding. When we hear something that reminds us of the places that we've been that are unhealthy, that aren't true, that aren't God's intention or aren't part of good, healthy leadership, right? And that can look in all sorts of different ways, whether it's listening and paying attention to doctrine or, church structure. That can be great. Jesus seems to be saying that extra mindfulness is something that he acknowledges and affirms. I see you are not able to tolerate evil. You put to test the ones who call themselves apostles and are not, and you have found them to be false. So again, many of us coming out of difficult church scenarios, we have gone through the ringer and come out the other side and said, you know what? I don't think that leader was leading faithfully. I don't think that this person was putting on the character of God in the way that they should have. And that's the experience of so many of us here. He goes on to say, you have patient endurance and you have endured many things because of my name, and you have not become weary. So if you're still here, if you're listening to this message, amazing. You've been through so much, deconstructed so much, experienced so much, and yet you're still willing to tap in and invest time, and invest energy, invest thought space in growing your faith and continuing to pursue Jesus in some way. That's amazing. But Jesus says, then this I have against you. You have left your first love. Remember, therefore, from where you have fallen, turn back and do the works that you did at first. Okay, so for a lot of us, whether it's coming out of the pandemic, and difficult things there, maybe leaving your church because it got super political, maybe whatever your story is, it's easy to say, I'm going to continue to show up. I'm going to continue to try to find these different ways to express my passion for justice or who I believe that God truly is. And for so many of us, then Jesus becomes like the framed photo on the wall, like our boss, and he's the vision statement. He's the mission statement. He's the reason that we do the things that we do and try to be who we are in our community. But that's different than the first love relationship that we used to have with God, that we used to have with Jesus before everything went downhill, right? And so Jesus has this invitation. He doesn't say, by the way, some translations say, remember how far you've fallen. It doesn't say that. It says, remember from where you have fallen. So remembering, yes, there was all sorts of baloney. Yes, there were lots of toxic things. Yes, there were lots of problematic situations that did not work out well. But there was something back then that was life-giving and that was good. And Jesus invites us to remember that, to remember what was it like when you were following me and you were like a child, right? Totally naive about everything that was going on. Remember from where you've come. And he says, turn back and do the works that you did at first. So this does not mean go back to the abusive church space, does not mean go back to the abusive marriage, does not mean, go back to whatever doctrine you've realized was hurtful to your loved ones or yourself or your community, but rather connected to first love. What were the things? How did I experience Jesus before in a way that felt really real and really life-giving? And can we go back? Can we trust ourselves? Can we trust God to keep us safe and start engaging in some of the things? How do we get back to our first love? Do we say the prayer again? Do we do this again? Jesus says the way is to remember what was good and then to do those things again. So maybe if you're an online person, that looks like trying out an in-person church again, right? It's 2022 coming up on 2023. I promise there are churches in the world that are good. You are not the lone wolf, the only one who has had this experience of your faith in your community. And it can be really hard if you're in a more rural area. And if you have questions about how to find a good faith community, feel free to reach out. I'd like to help facilitate you with that. But maybe for you, the best time in your faith walk where you felt like you were really thriving was when you were surrounded by corporate worship and being with other people who are doing their best to follow Jesus, right? And so for some of us, it looks like getting out of our COVID den, our COVID lair, and trying out a new church community again. Which can be scary and feels vulnerable. And what if they don't have anything right? Or what if they don't have everything right or anything right? Right? Those are both different concerns. Maybe for some of us, it looks like, oh man, the heart of my experience of Jesus that was so life-giving to me before was prayer. I was someone who prayed all day, every day. And ever since this happened, that's felt broken to me. And I haven't felt like that's authentic or something that I can really do. It's an invitation here in Revelation 2, returning to our first love, returning to the way we used to relate to God and saying it is still possible, even without all these other things, right? Because maybe before it was, you can only do this in order to be a good Christian, or you better not do this or else your relationship with God will be broken, right? So we've set those narratives aside, hopefully, Lord willing, but we don't want that experience and those extra narratives to rob us of the real nutrients that is there for us, that's waiting for us, the presence of God that wants to engage with us and be felt by us. Maybe it was hikes, maybe it was being in the text, maybe it was volunteering. I don't know. Whatever it was for you that made your soul come alive and made you feel like God was truly right there. We're invited to remember that it was good and try it out again. You have some people who can help you. It can be scary, right? You are not going to go back off the deep end. You're not going to be able to delete all the things that happened and accidentally return to the place you were. Jesus says, if you do not, I will remove your lampstand from its place unless you turn back. So it's hard to really do a good unpacking of what that's actually talking about. But again, it's from the Minor Prophets. And so Jesus says there are consequences. Let's just leave it at that. There are things that happen. There's stuff that we miss out on if we do not lean into this and we do not respond to this invitation. And he says, you do have this. You hate the deeds of the Nicolaitans, those people, which I also hate. Which is funny because here at Refuge, we spend so much time working on loving our enemies and working on seeing other people complexly and being humble about that. But there is something about saying, about acknowledging this is not the right way, and this is damaging, and this is not of God, this is not holy. And Jesus here says, look, we're aligned on that issue. So what is the issue of the Nicolaitans? You can go look at the Wikipedia article and you'll see pretty immediately that nobody really knows. Some people think it has to do with food given to idols. Some people think it's compromised in some other ways. Some people think that they were wife sharing. It's hard to say because in the early church, the blogosphere was alive and well, in that there are these guys who run around and collect all of the heresies and write these scandalous things about them. You won't believe the way they're doing communion, and there's usually something sexual involved. Like, what? Why? It's a very like all caps type energy. And so we don't know, because of all these extrapolations and guesses over church history, exactly what it was that this particular sect was up to. But Jesus affirms, look, you know what is darkness and you call it darkness, and that is good with me. So again, it reminds me of our people. We might not know exactly what it looks like to return to our first love immediately. Maybe you do. Maybe the Spirit's been speaking to you, and that's wonderful. But Jesus says, look, at least you know what darkness is, and I'm with you on that. Then he says, the one who has an ear, let them hear what the Spirit is saying. Amen. The one who conquers, I will grant to them to eat from the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God. So again, I just love Jesus whenever he throws out what conquering looks like in a Christian context, right? Which is so often nonviolent. Our conquering looks like our ability to return to our first love. Conquering, for people who have experienced church hurt and deconstruction, say, I am not going to let what happened to me get in the way of a fullness of abundant life in God. I'm not going to let the way that somebody else put Jesus on display damage the rest of my life. I'm not going to let this chapter define the rest of my chapters, and instead I'm going to fight for full joy and full flourishing, which is what Jesus says. I will grant to them to eat from the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God. I will allow you into the sanctum of the way that things are supposed to be. And there is richness there. There's a tree of life there that we are invited to come back and experience through pursuing God's presence. He says that those who pursue him will find him. He says, Hosea 2, that he is longing to speak to us the way that he once did and call us out into the wilderness with him. Alluring is the word that it uses, and speak over our hearts and invite us to go through this valley of trouble, through the doorway of hope, and experience these vineyards that he has for us. And if we are not able to say whatever our type is, whatever gospel message resonated with us, I am already loved. I am already good enough. I am already this. I do not have to run away anymore, whatever it is. If we never let that fill up our being, we are missing out on the tree of life, which is the paradise of God, which is not my heart for you. As your pastor, I would much rather take a step of faith. Step out of the boat, step out onto this new shore of trying again and saying, what does it look like for me to trust that God has got me and is still inviting me, is still knocking on the door, as we heard in youth group perhaps all those years ago. What does it look like for me to say yes today to that? Right? So I will pray, because we need help in the Spirit. And I hope you have a wonderful beginning to the holiday season while I'm on maternity leave. I welcome all your prayers for labor and delivery in those first weeks with our baby girl who's coming. So I will pray and let everyone go. God, I thank you that you love to give us good things. that you don't just love us so that we'll fall in line and do the stuff and check the boxes and do what we're supposed to do. You love us because you delight in who we are completely. And we are invited not just to say, interesting, cool, how can I transform that to be life-giving to somebody else? We're invited to take that for ourselves, to taste and see that you are good. And so I pray that we would have the courage, the trust, the faith to say yes to that, to trying that once more. I pray that you would continue the healing work that you have begun in us, that you would not let anything fester, Lord, but that you would bring shalom and wholeness and completeness, tamim, to our whole beings. I pray that we would have, again, the courage to seek after what were the things that I did at first? What was life-giving from before? Say yes to them and try them again, that we might re-experience you, our first love. Whether that's going to church or listening to worship music or praying or being in the text, whatever it might be, Lord, so many more ways than that. Those are just the classics. I pray that you would be with us, that your spirit would speak to us, that we might have good wisdom and good discernment in that process, and that we would experience you in powerful ways and know that you are still real and still there and still with us and still longing to love us in tangible expressions that we get to enjoy today and the rest of our life. I pray that you would not allow the enemy to steal from us what is rightfully ours as your children. We are your heirs. And I pray that the enemy's attempt to steal our joy, steal our closeness with you, steal our trust in you, our fullness of living would not be successful, but that you would be triumphant in this place in our lives. I pray all these things in your name, Jesus. Amen. All right, guys, I'll see you on the other side. Bye.